Have you ever thought, why don't they teach that in school? As a teacher of 23 years myself, I noticed that students had less and less of some of the basic skills they needed for everyday life. You know, things like how to write a thank you note, how to make a phone call, how to apologize, how to write a check and balance your account, how to sew on a button, how to clean the bathroom and vacuum and do laundry, how to operate a fire extinguisher, how to turn off the water to the house. And thus, Adulting 101 was born. You can go to jamesdevine.net, click on the Adulting 101 course link, and take a view of a few free lessons. And if you like what you see, sign up for the full course, and you can get 30% off as a Cool Grandpa listener. Just enter the code COOLGRANDPA at checkout.
Hi, I am proud to have partnered with Redio. As you guys may have heard from past episodes, Redio is a great application that enables grandparents and parents to maintain and grow relationships through virtual reading of books with their grandchildren. Now, Redio does not take the place of any kind of in-person interaction or in-person reading to your grandchildren. But what it does allow for is for those remote connections when you can't be there with your grandchild every evening. Redio has well over 4,000 children's titles, and there's bound to be titles in here that you and your grandchild are going to enjoy together. There's a great way that you can build a library with your grandchild, and there's fun interactive tools within Redio that allows grandchildren to point to objects that are interesting to them, as well as you using the pointer to show objects that are interesting to you and that you're trying to express to the grandchild. So what I want you guys to do is go to thecoolgrandpa.us, look for the affiliate links on the top of the website, click on that, and then go down to the Redio links. Once you click on that, then you'll be taken to Redio where you can learn more about the application, and then you can also sign up for your free 14-day trial period. I know you're going to enjoy this application to maintain and grow those relationships when you just can't be there in person. So do yourself a favor, go to thecool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link, and then scroll down to Redio. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to hearing stories about how you've used Redio to build those connections. Hey guys, I want to introduce you to Frank Pomata. Now, Frank, or Baba, as he's known to his grandson, is a really interesting guy who is somebody that we had a great discussion that you're going to be listening to, talking about the generational differences between his grandfathers, his grandfather Carl and his grandpa Tony, and then how he views being a grandfather in today's environment, right? So we do a little comparing and contrasting. Not that one's any better or worse than the other one, but seeing where we can, as grandfathers, even make a bigger impression. You guys are really going to enjoy listening to Frank's stories about growing up, working with his grandparents in Brooklyn, and what that environment was like. It was totally foreign to me because I've always been a kid that grew up in the suburbs, and my grandfather was on a farm. So the activities and some of the things that he was able to do and be exposed to as a kid in New York City is completely different from my background. So that was an interesting discussion to hear somebody that was born and raised and grew up in New York City. What I want you guys to do is lace up those shoes if you're going for a walk, or pour yourself a fresh beverage if you're going to sit down and take a listen to this conversation. And at the end of this, what I want you to do is make sure that you go to Frank's LinkedIn profile. Now, I'm going to put a link for Frank's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Go there and drop him a message. Let him know how you enjoyed our conversation and how you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Frank and his experiences with growing up in New York City and his experiences and his views about being a grandfather now. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. Hey, Frank, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really do appreciate you taking time out of your evening to sit down with us, have a conversation, not only about your grandfathers, but also your experience with being a grandfather. I think this is going to be a great conversation for us.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. Now, as we get started, why don't you introduce your grandfathers to us a little bit? Let's talk about Carl and Grandpa Tony, and give us a little bit about their backgrounds and your experiences with those guys.
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and we actually lived upstairs from my maternal grandparents, and that would be who I knew as Grandpa Carl, but subsequently found out in later years his name was actually Carmello. My grandfather on my father's side was, I guess, what would be today called an illegal immigrant, interestingly enough. So I find myself interested when I listen to these debates about immigration. That's often in the back of my head. He jumped off a merchant marine ship in the New York harbor and blended in with the Italian-American community there in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, became a longshoreman. And I knew him as Grandpa Tony, Grandpa Anthony, actually, and found out after he passed away that his actual real given name, he was from Sardinia, and his name was Antioco. So, I guess that's the story of American assimilation.
Oh, but, yeah. I was just going to jump in because that story, talk about almost the American experience, right? My wife, her family's Irish, and they've got relatives, kind of the same story. Somebody broke somebody's glass window. They were getting in trouble. This guy jumped ship, was hiding out, fell asleep. Next thing you know, he's 500 miles heading towards America. Gets here, gets off the ship, and it's like, okay, kid, here's the land of opportunity. And
yet, because of those folks here, the two of us, Greg, you and myself, and these men, I've come to realize have really shaped me. Being a grandfather has been even more significant for me in some ways, I think, because I'm not a biological dad. When I met my wife, she was a young widow, and so I have 3 adult stepchildren. So in some ways, being a grandfather has also been akin to me to being a parent. I've watched this little young man, Lucian Thomas, growing up and experience things that other men maybe, experienced as fathers, but I was experiencing for the first time in the role of grandfather. And I often like to joke around that that's my favorite job title, Grandpa. As I've thought about how I interact with Lucian, I told you before we got on this thing, I came home early. Actually, I bought a new car recently. I traded in my Mustang, got a Dodge Challenger. Well, he and my wife met me in the parking lot, and they wanted a test drive. So he jumped in the back seat and all, and we did that. And we came home, and he told me that Grandma played almost as good as me, maybe even better, while they were at the house today. So they'd set up a whole scenario behind me in my office, which he sleeps in. There's a futon here, and he's got all these stuffed animals and characters there. And so we had a whole zombie apocalypse thing going on. And, he's like Francis Ford Coppola, too. He gets a scenario going and stuff. You better be in character. I say he complimented Grandma. She was doing it for him.
Right. Now, has he talked about wanting to shoot any movies with his iPhone or anything along
it's
those
interesting.
lines?
He's only getting ready to turn 9, so we haven't gotten into that quite yet. He loves to watch YouTube educational videos. It's rather interesting. I often watch over his shoulder when he's playing games like Roblox and whatnot, just so like I can be conversant when he's talking to me about something. And I don't do any gaming myself, but I watch him so that when we're talking, at least I'm somewhat conversant with what he's saying. I know what these characters are. And so, but it is interesting. He loves, I got to the top of the stairs one day, I didn't even put my attaché case and get my tie off. And he's saying, do you know who D.B. Cooper is? I'm like, yeah. He goes, come on, we got to watch this video about him. And apparently it's the same guy's voice narrating these things. He's sort of like, did you know type videos. And he seems fascinated by them. He's got this very curious mind, which is kind of cool. And that's something I think that my grandfathers encouraged in me. I was talking to one of my coworkers who's Spanish speaking, very intelligent woman, but sometimes feels funny about her accent. And we talked about it. There's a saying of just because I speak with an accent doesn't mean I think with an accent. And I reminded her of that quote because she felt a little self-conscious about an interaction she'd had. I think it was with a coworker, might have been one of our clients at the Department of Labor. You know, my grandfather spoke very broken English because this Grandpa Anthony I'm speaking about, the longshoreman, because he mostly spoke Italian at work and also at home. And and yet he had this giant collection of National Geographic magazines. Like they had these built-in bookshelves in the wall, and I would go over there and I would just sit on the floor and go through these. Well, when I was about 9 or 10, Lucian's age, he got me a gift subscription, and I started receiving these things. And to this day, I've kept that subscription up, and I share the stuff with Lucian sometimes, you know, magazines, books, my interests. Grandpa Carl was probably the one who gave me the car bug. He had this 68 Galaxy 500, and he drove it like he stole it. We'd go to like Nathan's and Coney Island in that thing.
Wow.
And, so I had this car thing always that he kind of instilled in me.
Yeah. It's really interesting too that when I'm talking with some of the adult grandchildren, when they talk about grandfathers coming over or grandfathers growing up, coming up through the Depression, not having much and maybe not having a formal education, it seems like there's a common thread where a lot of these guys, whether it was National Geographic or Scientific America or something, where there was this innate thing of like wanting to see the bigger world. Like they knew, you know, maybe circumstances and things weren't such, but, you know, with a subscription to National Geographic, he could read about Fiji. You know, he could read about the crocodiles in Australia, you know, whatever that is. And then be able to turn their grandkids and their children onto that with the idea of that education, you know, travel, all this stuff is good for the experience.
That longshoreman raised 4 boys. My dad had 4 half brothers, and they all went to college. My dad only had a few classes at Brooklyn College, but his 4 other sons, they had subsequently remarried, they all went to college. And I mean, got serious. You know, one of my uncles was an engineer who worked for the Defense Department on things, you know, Cold War era stuff that he couldn't talk to us about. That's pretty impressive. One of the other things, too, is that, and it's funny, there's a parallel here. Lucian's stepdad, my stepdaughter subsequently remarried, he lives in a similar household to my biological household of origin, where it's kind of a yelling household. You know, his stepdad seems to think that turning up the volume solves the problem. And I grew up in a yelling household, so I tend to speak softly and all. I can let him know when he stepped over a line or whatever with body language, and maybe I actually get a little quieter perhaps, and I'm making some eye contact. But I've tried really hard not to have a yelling or a hitting, for that matter, because, you know, I had old school Italian parents. So, you know, you hit first and ask questions later. So that parallel is very interesting. And that's what brought me to see myself as much like Grandpa Carl. He was very soft-spoken in contrast to my dad, who was a very loud Italian-American gentleman. And, you know, no disrespect to Dad. You know, that was just his style. And the same thing with my son-in-law. That's their style. But he comes over here, and he seems to like that, different comments he's made. So I'm glad that to me, it's a good thing. He's getting a mix of different experiences of masculinity, and he can kind of take from that and all. And, you know, and he's rubbed off on me in different ways. Becoming a grandfather, I really have said to my wife, it's been like a transformative experience. She's seen aspects of me that I don't think I knew were there. And I think sometimes when she expresses concern about his stepdad, I say, well, you know, Lucian's rubbing off on him too.
That's interesting how that happens, because I'm very similar story. I came in, my wife, Karen, had divorced, and I came into the picture, and I already had a 5 and a 2-year-old basically. When I
called him.
When I was coming out of college and going into grad school, it was, you know, found them, and it was a poor water mix, and suddenly I went from being okay sleeping on a couch to I got a family of 4. But I jumped those stages of very newborns and everything else. And it was interesting how those kids and their behaviors and interests, rubbed off on me and changed me, even as that new dad coming in. And now with a 3-year-old too, I'm getting back into like, oh, okay, this is really the experience of that newborn and the 6-month-old and the 9-month-old, all that kind of stuff.
Well, you don't see it because I've got a virtual background up. I've got 4 displays of Hot Wheels cars because this young man reignited a childhood passion, me buying him some Hot Wheels toys. The next thing I knew, they were coming in the mail from eBay and this and that. And I actually have my grandfather's Galaxy 500. I have my first car, which was a 71 Roadrunner GTX in Ticket Me First Officer Red, of course. So that was just a car for a 17-year-old male to have. So I kind of got rid of that real quickly and went into sleeper mode. And I have my dad's first car, which was this big monster Dodge sedan that like they used. It was the cop car in the Blues Brothers. So that introduced me to the concept of what you call a sleeper car, where it had the power under the hood, but, it looked like a grandpa car, so you didn't get a second look from the cops. But, it's interesting, the passions. We went on a whale watching thing. Now, that was something that I kind of in the back of my mind always thought would be a cool thing to do. Well, this kid expressed an interest in whales. Next thing I know, my wife is booking us off of Montauk Point, the whole family. I don't even know what the heck she spent on it, but we all went and on a whale watching thing. And it was great. And that was driven by him. And that was kind of cool because I don't know about you, but for me growing up, our interest in happiness didn't always enter into the equation. It was kind of like getting in the car, we're going to see grandma or aunt so-and-so, and, whether or not you like where we're going, might it be in church even. Right. That's not part of the equation. Just get your butt in the seat and we're going. And I don't care who's touching you. Don't make me pull this car over. All the old tropes and things like that that we often say.
Yeah, the I'm going to leave you at the side of the road.
I heard them all.
Yeah.
I this poor kid one time. We talk about funny things, lessons that males pass on, this and that. The kid says to us, we're driving somewhere on the parkway, and he says, "I have to go to the bathroom." Now I'm thinking to myself, okay, he's in the back seat of my car. I don't know how urgent it is. I know you and I might think about it early on. So I said, all right. So I pull over and I said, what are you doing? I said, he's going to learn to pee on a tree. So his mom happens to be an arborist. So I get him situated. We're out of sight, the roadway and this and that. And we're ready to do a thing. And then he turns to me and he calls me Baba. And he says, Baba, is this going to hurt the tree? And I just thought that was the most hilarious thing I'd heard. And yet it also reflected, I've tried to instill in him a love of nature and respect for all, types of creatures, Don't stomp on the ants. They're not doing anything to you. That guy was going back home, and now his family's probably wondering, hey, what happened? He just went to get a leaf, and he didn't come back. So, I thought on my feet real quickly, and I said, the trees are probably used to it. I said, the animals, they do their thing here. So that was our little moment. I said, I'll teach him to write his name in the snow next time.
Yeah, and you guys up in New York get enough snow that you can practice a time or two.
I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those things where Grandpa's in the north and the snowy climates. That's almost like, hey, you should check that off your card.
Yeah, definitely. And again, talking about pulling things out of me. Me playing on the floor with him and stuff. My wife's watching and she's seeing aspects of me she didn't see. I'm an accidental self-published children's author. I think I might have told you. Thanks to this young man.
Right.
He had this obsession when he was younger with garbage trucks. We had the garbage trucks come to our apartment complex, and they do the thing where they lift the bin over the top. And he just thought that was the most fascinating thing. So one day I just took a yellow pad out one Saturday. He sleeps over here usually once or twice a week because they're close enough to do that. And gives mom and dad some adult time. And, that became a regular thing. He had to be chasing a garbage truck around one of the local towns one time. So anyway, I took a yellow pad out and I just penned a little story, The Boy Who Loved Garbage Trucks. It just kind of stream of consciousness, just sort of threw something together, a couple of pages.
Right.
Well, I read it to him and my wife, and they were like, my wife suddenly gives me homework. She says, that's so great. He should have that as a keepsake. You need to self-publish that. I'm like, are you kidding me? I all I wanted to do was write the kid a little silly story. So now it's 9 books later.
Right. Yeah, you didn't know you were signing on for a 50-hour task,
I totally didn't yet, but he's sort of my muse. I mean, the people say to me, well, how'd you come up with this crazy idea? He'll do or say something and it will make me think. On one occasion, he asked me to write something, and that was, he said, could you write a book about me and dinosaurs? Kids, like many kids his age, he's into dinosaurs. So I kind of ripped off Jurassic Park a little bit there, but I incorporated his mom. And another thing I did was like something sort of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And his stepdad is a very mechanical dude. And so I have a shed in the backyard, and I made him almost like a Dick Van Dyke, chitty chitty bang bang tinkerer type guy.
Okay.
And that there was this device that he was working on, a shrinking device. And Lucian, of course, gets himself into it and shrunk. Well, the whole story revolves around all the misadventures of them trying to get him back up to normal size, all before mommy gets home, because then the both of them are going to get killed, and it won't matter who's what size.
Oh, yeah.
mommy finds out what happened here.
Take me back a little bit, because I grew up in the suburbs. My grandfather was a farmer out in Eastern Oregon. So take me back a little bit about being a kid growing up in the city with the grandfathers, and what were some of those early activities, and what was some of the stuff that you guys did?
That's a fascinating question. It's so true. Yeah, the differences, urban, suburban, rural. Well, like I say, we lived upstairs from Grandpa Carl, so the majority of my things were with him. I was his driving buddy, and it didn't matter if he was going to the dumps to get rid of garbage or an errand, or he loved to go to those street hot dog vendors or to Nathan's in Coney Island, and we lived close enough to there to zip over there. So a lot of times I was with him, and we would just go places. He had a business on the side. He worked for Nestle's Corporation by day, but he also did people's personal income taxes, and he had a little business a few blocks down. And a lot of times I'd go and visit the office, and he'd have me doing little chores around there. And that was something kind of cool, just being in an office environment. Like I learned certain things, like taking a message down and cleaning up and whatnot. I get like 25 cents. I think copiers were just coming out in the early 70s, very, very primitive, but I get like 25 cents, to kind of copy a tax return. Grandpa Anthony, we had a more distant relationship with when I was a young man. He lived in Brooklyn too, but with the divorce and all, there was a separation. But my dad and him kind of reunited in his later life, and it was kind of neat. He like I said, we go over his house, and he shared the National Geographic. So I was always sort of sitting in front of there. From an early age, amongst my 3 siblings, I have 2 sisters. I'm the oldest. I gobbled up books, and I'm omnivorous. And I don't know if it was being around those books there and all, but I remember the Scholastic at school. You could kind of buy a book and this and that for like $1 back then or something like that. Right. But that was something my grandfather encouraged, and also Grandpa Carl too. I share a lot of my hobbies and interests, and some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. Some of it Lucia could care less. But I remember being downstairs in my grandfather's basement, and he had been an amateur boxer. He also was self-taught on 8 different musical instruments. His brother and he had their own big band before they got married. When they got married, both of the wives told him, no, you're not going to be in nightclubs every Saturday. You're a family man now. So he would play the violin, or he'd have this one artist who played, clarinet maybe, Pete Fontaine.
Okay.
And he'd have his music playing, and he'd be playing along with it. And I'd just be down there with him. And, and he had a little tomato garden on this like postage stamp size little backyard in Brooklyn. And he had his little tomato plants. And so sometimes I was helping him with that, So it was a different kind of thing. And we lived across the street from Sunset Park itself. The neighborhood was named after this park that we lived literally across the street from, with a pool and with those concrete tables that people could play chess or checkers on.
Right.
And we'd go over there and we'd play checkers over there sometimes, or go sleigh riding when it snowed.
And I imagine as you got older, the experiences broadened out even more, right? It was especially maybe around the music and around the food and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Most definitely, yeah. One of the really neat things was that my grandfather, who was a longshoreman, he had a love of the water. And when he retired, he moved out here to Long Island. He followed us. We moved out to Long Island. A lot of people emigrated to the suburbs from New York City. And we had done so in 74. And he retired, I think, 77 or 78. And he lived close enough to us. He got himself a small boat, and we would go out on the water with him. And he'd kind of point out different things. Well, this is this, and there's the buoys and whatnot. And he was kind of explaining to me, what that meant and whatever. I never got to kind of take the wheel. That was his wheel, and you weren't getting that wheel. There were people too that I felt safe. Most with Grandpa Carl, again, because it was very hard. I had to strain to understand Grandpa Anthony because of the language and the broken English, because of the fact that he spoke Italian in the household primarily and also at work. So his English was very difficult to understand. But with Grandpa Carl, he was second generation. So, he was someone I could kind of confide in or talk to about things that I might not so readily go to mom or pop about. He'd take us to Coney Island on the boardwalk, my sisters and I, and he was very indulgent. And I've reflected on myself as a grandfather, and I see a lot of Grandpa Carl's influence in there. There was a softness about him. He was like the original sensitive guy. My grandmother cursed like a Marine. She was a tough character. I don't know where that came from, but Grandpa Carl, I don't think I ever heard him raise his voice or whatever. I'm sure he disciplined my mom and her siblings and whatnot, I never saw anybody disrespect them. Back one time there was a fight outside or something like that, and I saw him involved. Like I said, he had been an amateur boxer, and something happened, and someone was being disrespectful, and so I saw him do what he had to do, but he was kind of a street. He let his fist do the talking.
Okay.
That's not a lesson that I took to heart. I studied martial arts, and Lucian, interestingly enough, he's where I left off. I went away to college. I was an orange belt in jiu-jitsu. He's studying karate now, and we're not of the size we can really spar, but I try to pass on him some of the lessons and that I felt were most important for my sensei. And the first one I told him was, what's the best way to win a fight? And I said, not to have the fight. Figure out a way to diffuse the situation, or walk away. You don't have to get chesty and have your ego involved. Every move, a lot of these apply to life too, I think. Yeah. Every move is a counter move. The other one, the third one, final one was always expect the unexpected. So each of those are applicable to martial arts, but I think also applicable to life, business, that kind of thing. So I've been kind of hammering those into him. He's getting a little bit bigger now. We had some fun at the pool not too long ago where I took the noodles, and he was telling me that they were going to do stick fighting. They were going to learn that. So I was showing him the moves with the noodles. So I had him bowing, and we were doing the whole thing on the lawn behind the pool. And I was watching the girls and some of the friends watching us, but I had him doing the whole thing. And I told him, when you get a little older, I says, we'll actually be able to spar because our physical sizes are too different now. But, using the noodles was kind of funny, but we were getting the motions down and the idea of what he was going to be introduced to shortly.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's one of the things that I love about our generation, because when I think of my grandfather, maybe at my age, now again, he was a farmer, so that's tough, hard work in the field. And
yes.
Tony was the longshoreman. They were not as active, mobile, or whatnot at our age. And so I love the fact that you're able to have. You're seeing yourself being able to have some sparring matches. And then I'm thinking of the same thing, like, hey, I can get out there and play a little basketball maybe with my grandson, and I can do some of those things. And that's one of those contrasting things that we have between ourselves and our grandfathers.
I think so, and our fathers too. I think you may have read an article. That might be how we came together, if I recall correctly, where I talked about, I wrote in a local newsletter for our region, Greater Long Island, about the more involved style of parenting and grandparenting, and how I love the fact that men of our generation are more involved. You know, my guy friends, I grew up with 4 close childhood buddies of mine, and I'm still in touch with them to varying degrees, but we were much more involved as men in our children's lives. They especially being biological parents, than our dads were able to, whereas they were primarily their role was defined as breadwinner, you know, and there was this very sort of strict delineation of the genders, or a lot more so, I would say. And I'm sure it wasn't universal, but spectrum-wise, it was very much this side. One of the things I love is that we've got a lot more freedom these days to do different types of things and to be more involved. And I should say, too, with our age, you know, becoming grandparents at a younger age than perhaps our grandparents did, we are still able to. And, you know, the funny thing, too, even about the karate and stuff and the martial arts is that I haven't done that stuff in 30 years. I haven't even thought about it. But once he started doing it and he was sort of demonstrating some stuff, the moves, like a muscle memory or whatever, came right back to me. I said, oh, okay, well, here, let's do this backwards kick. And it was funny because he was asking me questions. Well, why is your hand open all the time? And I use a closed fist. And I said, well, that's the difference between karate and jiu-jitsu. I said, we tended to go with an open hand, and karate is more of a harder thing, kind of like kung fu. You know, there's different little gradations there. So we were sparring, and but it was interesting. He picked up on that. He's rocked me on my heels too. You know, he's a deep thinker, and I think a lot of kids are, and I don't think adults, especially of our parents and grandparents' generation, listen enough to kids. I ran 2 after-school programs, and I love working with young people. You know, he was very observant, and my mom passed away in January, and unexpectedly, I didn't know how I was going to react. I actually thought I was going to really fall apart because I was very, very tight with her. My dad passed away some 20 some odd years ago. We tended to butt heads more. You know, he was old school, and, you know, if I went in a different way than he did, it was his way or the wrong way. Mom and I could agree to disagree, and we had a similar outlook too, to the point where my sisters used to call us one brain. We found out one day they slipped and said in front of us, what's that all about? You know, getting into that, you know, the style and stuff, you know, there's a lot more of an ability there, you know. So mom passed away about that. I didn't feel like talking to people and telling the story over and over again. So for about a month, the phone was ringing and I was letting it go to voicemail. Hello, little man. We just had a hello. And he asked me, he said, how come when those, I said I didn't want to take that call to my wife, and so I just let it go to voicemail. He observed that and he said to me, how come it's okay for me to say sorry for your loss of great-grandma Palmer, but it's not okay for you to talk to those other people? And it really rocked me back on my heels. I mean, just even saying it now. And I had to think about it. And I said, you know something, Lucian? And I want to give him real answers too. That's another thing. I think we got a lot of BS, no answers, kind of like just because I said so. I try very hard to answer him at whatever level. I had to think about it. And I said, you know, Lucian, I says, Bob, I did not know how I was going to react when great-grandma Palmer passed away. I said, but right now, I said, I just don't feel like I want to talk. I just kind of want to be with myself. But I was keeping all the sympathy cards and phone messages I was taking. I was putting them on the coffee table. So I pointed that pile and I said, but you know what? When I'm ready, I'm going to call every one of those people and thank them. But I need to just sort of gather energy. But just the observation there, I still to this day, I'm like, wow, man, that was like a powerful question that he asked.
Yeah. And the thing that struck me is having that conversation, that relationship, it's also telling him that it's okay when you're sad that you don't have to engage, you know, at that time, you know, because he's going to have stuff where something happens, he's going to feel sad. Everybody's going to try to go, what's wrong? What's going on? How can we help you? Let's get, you know, because that's the natural thing. But I think it shows him that it's okay to go, hey, I need my space. I need a little bit of time before I'm ready to engage.
I'm also not afraid, and related to what you just said too, I had to struggle with the answer and tell him, I really don't know, or I didn't know this.
Yeah.
I think those 3 words are really powerful for adults and teachers to say to kids. Not give them a BS answer or this and that. I'm not afraid to say to him if he asks me a question, you know what? I don't know. But a lot of times I'll joke and I'll say these days, I'll say, come on, let's go to the Oracle of Google and we'll find out, or something like what I used to say in my after school program. The kids, if they threw something at me, I say, you know what? I'm not sure, but let's go find out together. Let's both learn something. And so I'm trying to teach him that it's okay. I don't think that that's something we got from our generation of parents and grandparents of a certain humility that, okay, I might be older than you and I might have some life experience on you, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have all the answers, and that's okay. A lot of times he asked me questions about some rather deep things, like after my mom passed away, we had some conversation about death. When his other grandmother, his stepfather, his grandma passed away of lung cancer 2 years ago. So he had some questions. Hello, young man. He keeps poking his head in here. The door's closed, but he's poking his head in. He knows what I'm up to. So he had questions. And the way my wife and I handle it is I say, he says, well, where is Grandpa Palmer now? Or what happens, or tell me about death. And I said, well, you know what? I said, this is what we think, or this is what people say. One day he's looking out the car window and he says, what's inside the sun? The sun's out there. What's inside of that? And I'm just enough of a geek that I actually kind of know the science there. So I said to him, I said, Baba can answer you. I happen to be in the passenger seat, so I'm turning back to him. I said, I can answer you. I said, I'm not sure you're going to understand everything. I said, but I'm going to give you an answer. I said, and if you have questions later on, we'll go over it. I said, but again, this is what we think. I don't like to speak in the same certitude that I think that we got because, hey, at one time, everybody was certain that the world was flat. And then we came to find out that it's not flat, or at least we think it's not flat.
Right, right.
So we're told, I'm not a believer in absolutists, and I want him to be able to make his own life choices. I also, part of that is respecting his mother and father, that they may have different worldviews than me as well. And I try to take pains as a grandparent to always keep that in mind is, okay, I know I have a certain particular way of looking at the world or a certain metaphysics that's in my view, but I don't want to push that on him. I want to let him make his own choices, but also want to be respectful and kind of steer clear if there's a difference between me and mom and dad or something like that.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's super important what you just said in terms of respecting the family's, whatever belief system. And that doesn't have to be a religious thing, but it's just worldview and how people get along and whatever. And being able to couch things is like, well, this is kind of what I think, and but we don't know. And it allows for that exploration, right? It allows them to pick up National Geographic and go thumb through, whatever.
Yeah. And if he'll get into an interest and stuff, and I'll take an interest right along with him. He's been on a pirate kick lately and stuff. So I saw a magazine on supermarket stand that National Geographic ironically put out an issue about pirates. So I got the thing, I read it, and I learned some stuff. So I said to him, I brought the thing out when he came to sleep over. My wife's like, what'd you get that for? I thought Lucia might say, oh, he's not going to look at that. I said, who knows? And if he doesn't, I'm going to enjoy it anyway. Maybe I'll learn something. I learned there were female pirates. I didn't know that. So what did he end up picking up on? Exactly that. He said, I heard him telling his mother there were female pirates. Now it's Iraq too. Part of what's been interesting as well is that he has been a vehicle for me to get closer to his stepmom, to his mother. When I came into the picture, his mother, who is the middle daughter of the 3 children, was the closest, my wife tells me, to her dad. So when I came into the picture, it was only about 2.5 years after his untimely, unexpected passing. All 3 of them were kind of like, what's going on, Mom? Who's this dude? Also, too, I was rather different from their biological dad. So they were kind of like, there's a mismatch here. He's not just like Dad. So I was a whole different animal to get used to. And, she was the one who was the coolest, the distant, most distant and prickly. And it's really interesting, and it's kind of warmed my heart. Through him, she and I have developed a closer relationship. And she shared with my wife one day, she said, I can't help but look at Frank differently because now I see him through my son's eyes. And that just about brought tears to my eyes. But it was a really beautiful vision. His mom happens to have sort of I said she's a Wiccan, and she's very much into nature. She's an arborist. She's very much into nature. And so she sort of follows like a Wiccan belief system herself. How she ended up with a Fox News watching type, I'm not sure, but somehow they make it work, So vive la différence.
Yeah, it's opposites attract.
Yeah, and you know what? He's a good guy. We both know that we don't see certain things eye to eye, so we just don't talk about those things. We kind of go our own ways. Kind of live and let live thing.
Yeah, and that's important for Lucian to see too. Is that especially in this day and age where we're talking about everybody's so polarized and you can't, and it's so tribal and everything else. It's like it's great to see, family of different, whether it's politics, sports, philosophy, religion, whatever it is, still be able to get together and have a meal together,
We just did that on Sunday, and it was so beautiful. It's a very tough thing these days to get adult children all together, and there's only 3 of them. All 3 of them, though, were in. The best part was none of them knew that I had $5,000 checks from my mother to give to each of them in an envelope. My mother, after I was married to my wife a couple of years, took me aside, and I was her executor, and said, I want to make Donna's children, I want to add them to my will. And I said, it's very nice of you, Ma. Well, they didn't know that they were coming to that dinner. When they got there, I said, this dinner has been convened by great-grandma Palma. And Mom had a very ethnic first name. She said, don't name any kids after me. She said, every time I would say my name, people would say, no, what's your first name? She said, that is my first name. She said, I don't want any grandkids going through that experience, so please don't name them after me. But that's what I said to them when they sat down. I said, oh, by the way, I said, this family dinner's been convened by Mom. And I actually had Lucian give the envelopes out, and I told them that he helped me write the letter the weekend before. I had him read the letter, and he told me that it needed the word sincerely, so I added it. I wanted the salutation to be with love, but I guess he's been learning in English language arts that you close a letter with sincerely. So I said, I'd rather close it this way, but I'll tell you what, I said, I like what you're saying. I said, let's put it in this other sentence ahead. And he was good with it. So we had a kumbaya. And so I told everybody, I said, and Lucian helped me write that letter to you all from Grandpa Palma. So they got a meal and a little something from the beyond, a little surprise. So that was a happy thing, because I couldn't do the same thing with my nieces and nephews because they're at a distance. So I just had to kind of mail those checks out. So at least getting to place that in their hands and see their reactions was nice.
Well, that had to have been very touching. Now, I will put a link in the show notes to the article that you mentioned that kind of brought us together. And that article is some thoughts on the value of grandfathers. And in there, you broke out about 6 different things that you were talking about. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the nurturing part and get your thoughts on that, because I've got some ideas, but I want to hear yours first on how grandfathers can be nurturing and maybe what some of the differences are between our grandfather's generation, our fathers, and maybe us.
Yes. I don't like some of the gender stereotypes that you and our generation grew up with. I think I said that earlier. And one of them, was sort of that men are incapable of, or just somehow women are natural nurturers. And trust me, I've met plenty of women who probably maybe shouldn't have been parents or should have been teachers if they worked for me in my after-school program. They didn't like kids. I've met a lot of men who have wonderful nurturing characteristics. And I am more of what I would say, is the alpha male archetype, and I would say I'm more of a beta male. I didn't grow up in a sports watching household, so it was a big shock. I was visiting some relatives recently, and my uncle said, "Oh, I'm going to put the game on." It's like that. What do you want to watch? And I was like, "Put on whatever you want." I says, "I don't follow any sports." With Lucian, the nurturing, when he hurts, I hurt, and I try to listen. That's one form of nurturing. It's comforting. Like you said, I don't try to always fix the problem, just sometimes being present. I mean, fully present. A lot of times, it's interesting, his other grandfather is older than me, is his stepdad's father. And he and my wife alternate babysitting because he's retired and she is semi-retired. And what Pop does is he's there, but he's watching TV, reading the paper, having coffee. And so it's kind of more like that old school model. So he's making sure they're not on fire and they don't run out of the house. If I'm there, though, I'm involved with him. My wife is there or I'm there. The whole thing with COVID and schooling. So we were helping him with his homework and stuff. It's summertime. We got these Brain Quest books. So, yeah, we got to play earlier. But first, he had to do today's thing was pages with subtraction. He's doing 2 or 3 pages a day. That's the dealio. So, the sharing of the interests, the having him sleep over. I had a friend who doesn't have any children. He just couldn't understand. Well, he's like, "Why are you so over involved?" He was saying to me in this child's life. Like, I don't remember sleeping over at my grandparents' house. I'm like, well, that was fine. Hey, that's how you grew up. I said, it's not an imposition to me. I enjoy it very much, and so does my wife. He's in love with our new sofa couch. When I go outside to that living room, I can pretty much guarantee that he's going to ask us to have what we call a camp out in the living room. Yeah, it's a lot more work and this and that for us and taking the thing out, but he's in love with this sofa couch, so that's the thing. Whereas normally he sleeps behind me on the futon here in my office, or as he calls it, his room.
Yeah.
I was finishing emails one night and he decided he was tired, was going to bed, and he's like, "Are you going to be in here for long?" And I looked at him and was like, "What'd you just say?"
Yeah, you're kicking me out of my office.
I'm like, first off, this is my room, and you're a visitor here, and second of all, I'm just throwing an email. I'll be done, and you can go to bed. So I don't know, did I touch on the nurturing things that you were looking for, Greg?
Yeah, because what I was interested in is getting your take, because I think sometimes as we've evolved a little bit or roles have changed, you definitely hit on that. I think the idea that only the women can be nurturers. And of course, we go back to divorce cases in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, right? It was divorces come up, the kids go with mom all the time. And I think now that's starting to change a little bit. Things are being looked at. And one of the things that really struck me when I read through your article was thinking about that sometimes men go through and express that nurturing side differently from women. Not better, not worse, whatever. There's some things that we do, and some of that is activities. And from the outside, I think it may look like, well, how are you building a connection? How are you nurturing that kid? And, sometimes it's that nurturing is actually going through a sparring session. If Lucian had a tough practice or he wasn't getting something, and part of that is restoring his faith in himself and doing that nurturing part through going through a sparring activity with him. Or it can be as simple as going for a car ride and going for some distance, right? And maybe we're not saying a whole lot, maybe we're not doing a whole lot, but we recognize the grandson, granddaughter has had a tough time, and maybe part of that nurturing is taking them out of where there's pain for a little bit, letting things calm down, and then coming back. So that was part of what I wanted to express, was a little bit of guys nurture, and a lot of us have this. Not everybody, just like you said, not all women, not all men have, whatever. But guys do this, and sometimes it's different, and it's sometimes hard to pin.
It's not as recognized because it's not what we traditionally associate. We're not nursing the baby necessarily or things like that. But you're right. And you just reminded me of something. We had this whole work at home thing, and I was working at home at one point in time for about 4 days a week. So I'm here in my office, and my wife's out in the living room or dining room doing homework with him. And he, like myself, struggles with math. Well, I heard him really self-flagellate himself one day over some math thing and really getting down on himself. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And I got up, I went into my attaché case, and I took a calculator. I always have a little calculator. And I knelt down so that we were eye to eye at the table. And I said, Lucian, I said, it sounds like you're having some trouble with the math. I said, Baba also had trouble being a math. I said, there's more to being a good person and a good adult than being good at math. I said, just don't try to be an accountant. And then I held up the calculator and I said, this is what I do. I said, when I have to do any kind of math and I'm struggling with it, I said, I have this device to help me to get through, even if I'm just balancing my checkbook or something like that, or adding up some simple figures, because I know that that's not my wheelhouse, my strength, or whatever. I said, I use this tool. I said, maybe that's something you'll do. But I said, well, right here, right now, I said, you're doing something for school, but don't make that about who you are as a person. I said, you're hurting my heart, just hearing you get down on yourself over school assignment, and that seemed to kind of help him, get through it. He seemed to hear me. You talked about the sparring thing. I was taking an interest in what's important to him, and I don't know. I used to like to watch. I was a big Star Trek fan as a kid. I'm still into sci-fi and whatnot. A little bit of a geek, I'd say. And my dad sometimes watched it, with me, but a lot of times, there really wasn't that same level of interest and engagement. I was watching this Japanese anime thing with him earlier, the demon thing, and I was asking him questions. Well, okay, what's his character? Who's he about? Oh, that's his sister who became a demon, and he's trying to, unchange her by going after so that's the bad guy who turns her or whatever. It was almost like a vampire type story, apparently. But I was following it. And again, a lot of it is so that I'll be able to have conversation with him and know what he's talking about. And then he'll know that if it's interesting to him, then I'm going to take an interest in it. It might not be his thing. And I would tell him hey, if I'm really totally keenly not into that. He forced me to cook one time. Baba does not like to cook. Baba's a really good eater and doesn't mind setting the table and clearing the table. And that was the prenup that we came up with, my wife and I. I was like, look, if you cook, I got the setup and the cleanup, but I really am not. I said, if you want to eat out of cans or frozen stuff, I can do that. So one day, not too long ago, he wanted to have baked cookies. And she's like, okay. He said, but Baba has to help. So there we are. He and I are both with the wooden spoons in the mixing bowl while she's setting up the baking pan. And I think that there was more cookie dough on the backsplash of the kitchen than there was in the bowl. But we made our peanut butter cookies or whatever the heck they were. I think they were peanut butter blossom cookies or something. But he was very intent that I was going to do it. Another time, he decided he wanted to be a restaurateur, and we made a menu together, and he became very engaged in convincing me about how I could be a good cook.
Oh, very cool.
Apparently this really concerns him, my lack of interest in cooking.
Right. Well, maybe he's going to turn on to the Food Network and things, and
maybe. And you know what? Again, they would be going against archetypes. I have some male friends who love to cook. That's just not my thing.
Yep.
Nothing against it, just not my thing. I like to eat, but I think about food when I'm ready to eat. People say, do you have to watch the Food Channel? No, I said, it just makes me hungry, and I have no interest in learning how to cook the thing. I just want to eat it.
Right. I don't want to take 45 minutes, to fix it. I just want to sit down to the table.
Yeah. And don't send me pictures of what you ate this morning for breakfast. I could give a shit.
Right.
Sorry. No disrespect intended, but, it's like, okay, that's really nice. I'm glad you made whatever you made for breakfast, but I don't need to see a picture of it.
Yeah. Now, Frank, we've been having a great chat, and could definitely go on a lot longer. But as we wrap up, what are some advice that you would give maybe somebody that's finding out that they're going to be a grandfather for the first time, and they're kind of looking down the road a little bit? How do I do this thing?
Yeah. Well, I guess just like being a parent, there's no user manual. I think there's no one size fits all. I think to just go into it with love, humility, treat that child as you would want to be treated. And as they get older too, adapt how you interact with them, I think when we were growing up, sometimes our parents didn't switch gears. My dad couldn't do that. He couldn't switch gears as I got older, whereas my mom actually, when I came home from college, wanted to have a closer relationship with me and actually asked me how she could do that. And I told her some things, and we did form a close relationship. I know that I will have to adapt my interactions with him as he gets older. And my wife has said to me, having been down this road as a parent, she said, cherish these years. They're going to go super, super quick. And she's so right. I mean, I just cannot believe how quickly he's now going to be 9 on the 24th of this month. Bringing a lot of love to the table, but also knowing that your example is probably the most important thing. Not the words that come out of your mouth, but how do you conduct yourself? There's different ways to teach and convey values. I could talk to a blue in the face. My dad was a big churchgoer, and no disrespect to churchgoers, but when I got to a certain age, I said, Pop, I'll skip the hour on Sundays, and I'm really into the values, but I don't get the same thing you get from that. And, I think that caused a bit of a schism because my dad happened to have been a seminarian. So that was a little rough for him, but I was just speaking my truth. So that's what I would tell someone who's newly learning to be grandpa is to, approach it with that humility and adapt, and kind of sometimes also to take your cue from the kid. Let them take the lead. When I come home and I know he's here and stuff like that, I'll often ask him, I say, so if he says you want to play, I'll ask him, what's the scenario we call it, usually I'll let him run the show. Every so often, though, I get tired of all the war games, and we talk about human beings and their predilection for violence as a species. And I'll say, can we do something peaceful? How about we join Elon Musk, and the bedroom's going to be Mars, and we're going to go join Elon Musk on his moon base. And you know what? One day he said yes, and so we didn't have any bloodshed that day. We went and explored Mars.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
In the bedroom.
Now, what's a good way for folks to connect with you if they're wanting to reach out? And like I said, I'll put the link to the article in here, but
I'm a big user of LinkedIn as opposed to other forms of social media, and I'm happy to connect with people via LinkedIn. So they can just look my name up and send me how to connect, and mention that they the Cool Grandpa podcast, and they'll get a free coupon. I'll connect with them.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. And I'll be sure to put I'll put the link to your LinkedIn profile and everything in the show
Feel
notes
free.
and stuff too.
I'm happy to do that. I would love to talk with other men about this because, Greg, I think what you're doing is a great thing. I don't want us to end without me putting that out, that I was just blown away when you contacted me and when I found out what you've created here. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And, props to you for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate the feedback. That's awesome. I'm going to let you go, but stay on the line as I'll say goodbye properly off the air here. But thanks again, Frank, for being with us. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Wow, what an interesting conversation with Frank. I absolutely loved learning about his grandfathers, and especially learning about how Grandpa Tony would sit there and play with the Pete Fontaine albums, right? And then how he would go driving with his grandpa Carl, and they would go down to Coney Island and get some Nathan's hot dogs. And, listening to that experience was something that was totally new to me and something that I can really appreciate. And I could really envision in my head what Frank was talking about. He's a great storyteller. Now, one of the big takeaways that I had from this was just how he has been able to connect with old passions and traditions of his youth and his experiences with his grandfathers with Lucian, and how that's working out today. I mean, he's connected back with his, hobby of collecting Hot Wheels cars. He's back into, or never left, but maybe reinvigorated into reading National Geographic and looking at these nature channels and all these different things about the world, right? He's seeing it brand new again through the eyes of his grandson, which is something that we all, I think, sometimes, take for granted as being grandparents is this awakening within us of different interests. I also love the idea of him sparring with his grandson. And I can't wait to hear stories when Lucian's a little bit bigger and he and Frank are kind of going at it a little bit in a sparring, just how that's working out, because I'm sure that's building a lot of confidence in Lucian being able to spar with his grandfather. So what I want you guys to do, please go to the show notes, leave me a comment at the website, and let me know what your big takeaway was from this conversation. And remember, be sure to give us a like in iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast, and be sure to share it with a friend. That's how we get the message out about how awesome grandpas are. Until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.